fingers actively clicking on the keyboard, trying to type correctly for work and to get out of here sooner. Eyes focused on the computer screen at the workstation. I just want to escape in the moment of waiting for that very moment. There's no one else in the office. The empty space forces you to focus. The only desire becomes to just run away and start over, with a clean slate. Perhaps it is in another dimension that the girl will not be bothered by the slanted glances, while now it is all that remains to be felt on a daily basis. It was the place where there would be no obligations that would be the best place to live and spend time, and it was the place where no one would know who the protagonist was. If the beauty was in the forest, she would feel much better and freer. There one could find freedom and finally meaning in one's life. The huge castle in snow-white colors, as if shading the sun, which is at its peak, illuminating everything around with bright light. The door slams shut with a distinctive sound, and from the side a servant's voice is heard addressing His Majesty, trying to ask something. The maid comes closer and immediately bows, hoping she won't get hurt. She, in passing, greets her host on her arrival at the estate. The blonde man doesn't react at all, as if he doesn't care for any politeness. Turning around, he asks where the girl is now without saying anything extra. Still without raising her head, as if afraid of something, the brunette, stammering, informs that the lady has been tried to wake up several times. While in the chambers, she didn't react at all. Not hoping to finish the sentence, the girl wanted to say something else, but the guy interrupts her speech. Turning around and heading for the room, he talks about dealing with everything himself. The room is poorly lit. The maiden is still unconscious, so she still doesn't know that her wish has somehow come true and all the words have been heard. Walking into the chambers, the blonde tries not to make any unnecessary noises. Stopping beside the bed, he stoically just looks around as if he's never been here before. Not daring to do anything, as if strategizing ahead, the young man steps even closer, hoping not to mess anything up, but also to do something effective. On the bed lies the body of a girl sniffling, wrapped in a blanket. It is completely motionless, however, at some point it begins to stir, thereby making sounds. Smirking, the man arrogantly looks around the bed. He has a lot of ideas about what he should do. Clenching his hand into a fist and feeling not the most obvious anger, the young man sighs and begins to lament everything that is happening, which seems rather odd. Deciding on an incomprehensible act, he yells for the lady to stand up now. Hands are involved, grabbing the blanket and tearing the thing off the beauty for an empty effect. A rumbling noise is heard in the room that presses on my ears. The butler freezes while the head maid puts a hand to her mouth out of shock, trying not to scream. The girl is now lying on the floor. In this world, the brunette has only recently appeared. Everything was new, but with time one could safely get used to everything. In just 3 months, the maiden had become the most perfect recluse. Without leaving her room or making any attempt at all to move around, she sat all the time all alone. The king sits on the throne. A foot is thrown over the other leg, showing how bored he is here, for it would be long past time to get out of here. Opposite stands the protagonist, dressed in snow-white robes that look like dresses and a balaclava at the same time. She remains silent, not trying to say anything or expend any energy. The man gets bored with this game, and so he turns to his interlocutor, asking her a few questions of interest, and the first of them, is it definitely the goddess that was found recently in the forest? The blonde man is the ruler of the empire, Michael Dinar Altius. Emotions don't convey the whole situation, but he's going to have a hard time figuring it all out. Letting all questions pass her ears, the lady still stands as she is, not moving from her seat. She is ordered to raise her head and not keep His Majesty waiting. Involuntarily obeying, the beauty looks up. The face expresses displeasure and a kind of humility, while the hands intertwine, hinting at embarrassment. Eyes sadly looking away, not letting the tears escape. In the background, quite quietly, as if hoping the words won't be heard, a voice repeats about the girl being weird. Already beginning to lose patience, the young man rests his chin on his hand and asks what the goddess's name is. Taking a few steps closer, the lady introduces herself. Her first name is Dayan and her last name is Lee. You can see hope in her eyes for help or to be released. Without saying how pleased he is to meet her, the young man only says that a revelation came to him before the maiden appeared. It would all be quite ordinary if it weren't for the fact that this is the first time in 32 years. Asking if the lady knows about it, the guy shuts up, while the lady he's talking to silently crumples in place. After her name, she doesn't have the energy to talk about anything else. Legend said that once the doors of Hergonia opened, a child would appear, possessing the powers of a primordial mage who had long ago left the lands. It all had some meaning and was somehow uniquely connected to the brunette, who herself didn't understand what the story was about. The protagonist fell asleep, and then when she opened her eyes the next morning, she saw only an unfamiliar forest instead of her bedroom ceiling. Loud screams could be heard all around. People who found the lady bowed down to her and called her a goddess. Begging her to come with them, they assured her that she would be much better off that way than if she had to stay in the woods. Humming, the prince recalls the priest who was most excited about Dayan's appearance. He now has more opportunity to demand a sum from the treasury and plunder the country under the guise of pure thoughts. Taunting the man brings up his other not-so-good deeds that he shouldn't have done, thus attracting Lee. Thinking about something for a few seconds, the blonde sighed. In his opinion, it would be better if the old man had long ago disappeared somewhere and no longer caused problems for the Empire. Without another word, Michael rises from his throne, treading carefully up the stairs, which are carpeted with a red carpet of expensive fabric. Being quite close and leaning into the heroine's face, Altius talks about how he feels nothing divine coming from the brunette at all, who only seems annoying. Determined to emphasize all the beauty's inabilities, the guy asks if she can read an ancient letter and then deliver its gist to the rest of us, to which he receives silence. She probably can't predict the future either, which is odd for someone of such high status. Perhaps the lady is proficient with a sword, spear, or any other weapon, or knows some basic healing skills. However, it is immediately apparent that neither is a given. Not wanting to waste any more of his time, Mikhail sits down in his chair again. Only one thing is clear, and that is only that the goddess knows nothing at all about this life. Putting her hand to her chin as if thinking about something, the beauty begins a speech about what she really knows how to do to prove her importance. According to her, she can clean up pretty well as do laundry. The servants standing at the back, hearing such nonsense, are in complete confusion over what is happening. Raising her hand to the sky, the lady still won't stop. It turns out she's a lot stronger than she looks. Clenching her arm as if showing off her biceps, the brunette smiles victoriously. She can even do men's work, thus being as good as any of the men present. The butler, as well as the servants, freeze again in utter shock, trying not to give himself away or say any words so as not to spoil the mood for himself and the emperor. The blonde man freezes, gawking. He doesn't dare say anything, and neither does anyone else. The interlocutor's previous remarks seem like complete nonsense. Shyly shifting her gaze and then looking toward the man again, the girl hums softly. She may be wrong about the job. Leaning back in his throne and then lowering his face onto his hand as if in despair, Michael sighs. It is unclear why this person was even sent to their kingdom and how she can help them. Embarrassed and lowering her gaze, shifting in her seat, the lady realizes she can't be here anymore. She herself doesn't know what she's good at, and everyone who's ever met her has reacted that way. People want too much from the goddess without controlling their desires and work, but there is nothing special about the heroine, because she is a simple woman. Thoughts are interrupted by the Duke's next line. He announces that the questions are over, and then orders a private room to be prepared for the maiden somewhere in the palace. The servants and Michael simply walk away and forget about the beauty, leaving her all alone in a room filled with darkness that consumes everything in its path. The door slams shut, portending trouble. I want to cry, but it's worth it to stay strong. The brunette is left all alone in the castle. The screams pull you out of your memories. A man's voice calls out, asking the servants what had happened to the room during his time out of the country. Looking around the room, he asks if anyone really thinks this room is livable. I mean, even some homeless guy could have a better environment than this. Turning and pointing his finger at the maiden, who sits on the floor wrapped in a blanket. The guy seems to accuse her. This action is quite logical. Staring absent-mindedly, the young man suddenly notices something behind the beauty. His gaze moves to the wall and then listens to another question, asking what happened to the painting on top. The butler, who appeared as if out of nowhere, comes closer to give an answer. It's just mold that occurs in dark and damp places, so a room like this was a great fit. Freezing, as if someone had wounded with that very word, the blond man's utter disgust at the idiom in question, as well as at the lady of the house herself. Not wanting to delay, Altius orders all the windows to be opened as wide as possible. On the sides, you can hear the swarming and agreements to follow orders quickly. Sunlight streams into the room. An attack this vivid hasn't happened in like 3 months, so Daeon wraps himself even more in the blanket. The light is a danger to the lady. Unwilling to tolerate this any longer and clearly losing patience, the man quietly approaches from behind and then pulls the bedspread off the brunette's head with all his might, thus eliciting a silent squeal. Carefully holding the thing, afraid of getting dirty and contaminated with some bacteria, the guy hands it over to the servant. The blanket should be burned so that not even a speck of dust remains. Almost as she cries, the goddess remembers her thing, which gave her a sense of security as well as some sort of support. These are 2 sad memories, yet they are interrupted by the emperor's murderous gaze. Folding his arms across his chest, the man asks if the lady is normal and definitely sane. It's definitely not the kind of environment people live in, and that's aside from the fact that it's not easy to die in such a state either. It doesn't matter how old you are because everyone understands that. Not at all ceremonious with the beauty, the blonde frowns and already again almost shouts exactly whether the lady is not out of her mind. From her eyes, it's hard to get ahead of any answer. Starting his lecture, Michael notes that it is worth walking in the fresh air, because in a healthy body, a healthy spirit. You also need to exercise and try to eat well to look after yourself. Listening to all the questions and unnecessary text between her ears, the protagonist shifts her gaze to her shaking hands, which seem to be being pumped by someone. Without giving any sign of it, the brunette talks about how she would like to be alone right now. If at all possible, she dares to ask to be left alone in her room. The maids and servants freeze. Their reaction is usually the weirdest because they think this girl is even weirder. No one has the right to answer the emperor in such a tone and ask for such things. Laughing quietly to herself, the lady finds this reaction funny. It's weird that there's something wrong here, since she asked for something politely, but it seems like she still did something wrong in the first place. Smiling and then leaning closer, the man plants hope in the girl's heart. He tries to show his friendly side, which will most likely turn out to be untrue. Almost crying, but looking mad, the beauty seemed to beg with her very look to be heard. We can only hope for awareness. Abruptly taking a step back because of the stench, the guy is angry with himself. He wasn't about to leave the goddess alone, so he orders the servants to pick her up and then give her a good bath. Holding his breath, about to set off another run of screams, the young man exhales. The lady doesn't look like a human being at all, so now the people around her will make a normal person out of her. One of the maids comes closer. Grabbing Miss Dayan's shoulders, she makes attempts to drag the lady in the direction of the proper bathroom, which is already being prepared. Trying to resist with all her might, the girl finally manages to turn around and look into her companion's eyes. Saying her name quietly, it was as if the brunette was begging her to do nothing. Marie tries not to cry because of annoyance. She really does not want to perform this procedure, but to refuse the emperor, she simply cannot because of the consequences, which may not be the most rosy. The gaze shifts to the maiden's hair. Something white, like dandruff and dirt, had long since managed to form due to not having washed my head in quite some time. Deciding to do the deed but not giving the appearance of doing so, the beauty just smiles in a friendly manner. She's not going to settle for anything. Grabbing Lee's shoulders and shirt again, she drags her toward the exit in absolute silence. In her thoughts, the maid pities the goddess, for she did not want to do anything. But the hour of washing has come. Reaching out for the light as if trying to grasp at least some air to go nowhere, the lady cries. She just wanted to rest and be alone away from everyone, with a day off every day. Turning to screaming, she asks why they decided to do this particular thing to her. Nothing to worry about here, however. To the shaky psyche it seemed that everyone around them were terrible enemies wanting to do harm. Shifting her gaze to the emperor, who stands with a smile to his ears, the beauty sobs. She wanted to know why the blonde man was doing this to her without regard for anyone's opinion. There is complete silence in the bathroom. The splashing could not be heard due to the lack of a shower, which could only frighten the goddess. Sitting in the tub, wrapped in a towel and submerged in the water, the brunette shakes. Thoughts focused only on revenge and the fact that his body was ready to freeze at any second. Marie, who has been around the whole time, notices the bluish tinge on the heroine's face and body, and so obligingly asks if some more warm water needs to be added. Not hoping for any response, the girl walks over with a bucket of hot water and adds it to the bathtub. to which she gets a response from the goddess. She mooed quietly and sank lower into the water. Only the face of the beauty, who is already girded by an abyss of water, is visible from the bathtub. She yawns quietly and then calls the maiden by name, trying to get her attention. Still not letting go of the bucket, which still has some water in it, the girl comes closer, asking why she was even called. The question was asked about the emperor. The heroine urgently needs to know if the emperor is really always so mean and acts like everyone owes him. After what happened earlier, she can definitely judge. Thinking about it, the maiden only hums because she only worked in this palace, but she knows maids who work in the imperial chambers. According to them, Michael is always collected and responsible when important matters are being discussed. Even by appearance, you can tell that the man is very industrious and collected, which is not true. The guy's appearance is completely different, and it only shows that he's not at all ready to run the country. As she was about to shut up, the maid suddenly remembers one very important detail. His Majesty exercises his sword every morning at 5 in order to achieve perfection. Turns out the kid hasn't missed a single practice since he was 8 years old. This is an amazing fact that comes out of Marie's mouth with a sigh of delight. Her face expresses no emotion, just a strange confusion and incomprehension. If he's been practicing since 5 in the morning, then he must be up at 4 in the morning. The next question on my mind is how old the boy is. While soaping the maiden's head, the maid still won't calm down. Rumor has it that the emperor used to be inept, which is why one day he decided to practice every day. Now, after all these years, no knight in the world can match him in skill and skillfulness. Becoming a genius through simple effort costs nothing these days. Frowning, the heroine drives such thoughts away from herself, for effort is also a kind of talent. Sometimes it's hard to pick yourself up and start doing something, so it makes sense. Life in the empire became much better after a man took the throne. As Marie continues her actions, she comes to the conclusion that Altius is a wonderful man. Blondie appeared for a reason, for he is a rich and capable man from birth. The throne was given to him easily, but he successfully maintains it, and the people around him love and unanimously recognize him. Looking sadly at the clear water, the brunette frowns her eyebrows. Such a description seems almost perfect for any human being on earth. The man is nothing like her. The maiden's memories are not rosy. From the moment she was born, there was nothing special about her like the rest of them. The very way she lived her life didn't seem in any way interesting or right. Dayun graduated from a mediocre university and worked at a small firm for most of her time, never changing jobs. Despite this, she tried her best to better herself and work hard. Being at the beginning of her journey, getting a job, the girl promised that she would do her best, hoping that in the future the management would promote her. Things didn't go according to plan on the first day. The lady was sent to work in a completely different direction, thus ruining everything. Lee went to the advancement planning group, to which she reacted rather calmly, but in complete shock. The second combo was the not-so-good atmosphere in the office. Everyone seemed to be trying to ruin the day from the very morning, so my thoughts were only occupied with how to get home as soon as possible. At work, had to sit 24 hours a day, because at 11 at night could easily show up check in the department, which did not let the poor girl go home. Tired of everything, the brunette realized she couldn't take this kind of abuse any longer. The perpetual recycling and stress took away the energy to even go to the bathroom. Her eyes were always wet, but trying to disguise herself, the girl assured everyone around her that she was perfectly fine. His gaze at night after his shift usually moved to his phone, which showed 4 or 5 in the morning, which meant it was worth packing up and getting out in 2 or 3 hours. Reality had become a nightmare that I really wanted to run away from and never come back. The desire to disappear was becoming more and more abrupt, so lying on the bed, the heroine dreamed about it. Only after disappearing from the world did the maiden realize that the other reality wasn't cotton candy either. It wasn't as smooth as I would have liked it to be. Her thoughts are interrupted, and her gaze is translated directly to the chandelier, which, until living in the castle, the average girl had never seen in her entire life, even once. The bathing was more than successful, and now the lady in the snow-white dress stands completely clean. That's exactly the feeling the sheep have when they are shaved. The emperor, who came as if from nowhere, smiles his sarcastic smile again. Now the lady looks like a normal and adequate person. Taking a seat on a chair that is in the same room, the boy mentions hygiene. If the heroine manages to take care of her further, she could be completely healthy. Expressing her extreme displeasure, the brunette sighs as if it were a penal servitude. He is not her mom to tell her about hygiene rules and other weird basic stuff. A hand lightly grips the back of the chair, while the man tries to find the right words to ask the question that is of primary interest. Without trying to shame Diane in any way, the blonde asks why she isn't eating. He'd noticed a long time ago that she had a bit of a problem with it. Averting her sad gaze, Lee only speaks quietly about how she doesn't feel like eating anything or doing anything in general. Seeing no sense in elementary things, the lady thinks only of tranquility. Folding his arms across his chest in a belligerent gesture, Michael interjects, trying to figure out if he just heard the truth. She can't eat on a whim, but only for the sake of her body 3 times a day. Again expressing his bias, the guy talks about how he doesn't care. It doesn't affect anything because you don't want to get a corpse that died of exhaustion right in the castle. Freezing, the girl tries to digest the vast amount of information she has just been given. It wasn't about exhaustion because the heroine feels just fine. A brilliant idea comes to mind. If Lee will be silent, then perhaps the man will give up and leave the interlocutor alone, finding for himself a more interesting occupation. Asking if the lady understood, the blonde waits for an answer, but begins to lose patience. With an angry stare, he asks the same question again, and then clarifies if he's being heard accurately. So, without making a sound, the goddess tries to show character and still hope for a favorable outcome. Apparently, she's definitely not herself since she decided to play with the emperor. Already feeling the words wanting to come out, the brunette tries to assure herself and her brain that she is a tree or a stone that has its own cycle. It's worth staying calm. Frowning, the guy shifts the gaze of his green eyes to somewhere on the table, then oops, as if realizing something. On the table is a plate of scrambled eggs alone, along with bacon and some vegetables. Agreeing with the unspoken words, the young man talks about how he himself would not eat such food. Turning toward one of the servants, Mikhail orders the head cook to be brought in. All he has to do is try it, and then he'll know whether he likes it or not. Bowing as if testing their master's patience, the servants promise that everything will be done to the best of their ability and the cook will be delivered in the next few minutes. Only one thing is unclear, and that's why His Majesty was so quick to flip to an innocent man. Jumping up and almost out of her chair, the brunette asks what that was about and why. Humming, the king suddenly stops the servants. It's probably not the fault of the cook alone who did something anyway. The interlocutor's eyes widen wordlessly. Rising from his seat and with absolutely no thought of the consequences, Michael shouts about bringing all the servants to the interrogation room quickly. The goddess squints, trying to figure out what kind of one-actor performance this is. The man never described his motives, but just immediately started giving orders left and right. Shutting up, only to then shout even louder, the guy states that it's the workers' fault. Everyone needs to be here now, or it'll be worse than not showing up. Realizing that things are starting to get steep, the brunette almost jumps up from her seat following the prince who is just standing there waiting to punish everyone who is to blame. The maiden has long since had time to accept the fact that this place is very real, but fear is still displayed on her pretty face. She doesn't want anyone to get hurt or out of a job. Turning around, the beauty seems to ask if it's all because of her, though it doesn't seem quite real. But it's true. The man's smirk is only a meter away from the girl's face, and so such a sight makes you want to recoil. The lady still doesn't seem to know what the new reality is. The castle seems quiet, but in the main hall there are terrible things happening and screams that make you want to plug your ears or run away. The servants stand in formation, squinting a little, accepting their guilt while the blonde asks why things turned out this way again. After all, you could have at least done something in your life in a normal way. Starting to throw various worthwhile things to the sides without stopping in any way, the man is outraged that there is nothing worthwhile here. And so this is considered one of the worst. Turning back to the dishes again, he looks at the food with hatred, only to then ask how you can even call this horror cooking when it looks like something else, less appetizing. Leaving no chance of escaping his righteous wrath, the young man cries out their rude behavior, for servants should be ashamed to be paid for doing such work. All as if alone fall to the floor and duck their heads, knowing perfectly well that they have no other way out. When asking for forgiveness, they repeat that they have done a terrible thing, and so they beg for forgiveness. Hiding behind the curtain to be away from the righteous anger, the brunette kept wondering why things had turned out this way. You could have just told them instead of making a mess that you'd have to clean up later. At this point, the blonde looked more like a deranged monster that nothing and no one bothered him. Poking the sheet of paper, the young man does not calm down. I want to cry and cower in some corner where no one can ever get the girl. It would be better if she was finally left alone and given some chance at salvation. Beckoning the butler over to him, the man waves his hand as if to show gestures and then orders everyone kicked out and new staff hired. Fear mixed with quiet terror overtakes the beauty. She certainly hadn't expected that in just 10 minutes everyone would be dismissed and put out like they'd done nothing for the palace. The guardsmen take out the resisting men who, in passing, trying not to aggravate their situation, apologize, almost crying because of annoyance. Shrinking a little, the lady can't stop feeling sorry. She definitely didn't want this, but now it's like it's all because of her. Her word will mean nothing against the emperor himself. One of the girls cries out that they have young children, and therefore they definitely need a new job that can provide for them. Clenching her hand into a fist as if deciding on something, the brunette quietly walks up behind the blonde, thus drawing his attention. Almost sobbing, she sobs and promises she'll eat it all. Whatever they put in for her, she can definitely destroy and then even thank the chef for the skillful food. Turning away from the window, which is no longer so interesting, the man smiles lightly, as if to make it clear that he approves of this attitude. Not daring to move from his seat or say anything, the emperor clarifies if it is true and if he is not being deceived, for it is of the utmost importance to him that all this is a true impulse. There are so many viands on the table that no one has touched yet. The meat, as well as the different sauces to it, beckon as if trying to get you to sit down and eat it. Frowning, the brunette bows her head. Because of the stress, she had completely lost her appetite, and so now even a bite would cost too much for her unaccustomed body. Being on opposite sides of the table, the couple is silent. The prince watches Daeyeon closely, as if hinting that she won't be able to sneak away from her meals. As slowly as possible, Lee picks up the spoon and gently pops it into his mouth. There is a persistent desire to spit out all the contents, but the main thing is to just eat it to make everyone around you feel good. Nibbling on what was offered, the girl sinks back into her thoughts. She is very curious as to why Michael is making such a mockery of the poor goddess. You get the impression that he just has this hobby, which is nothing short of amazing. Saying nothing, the boy finally shifts his gaze and breaks away from contemplating the maiden. Picking up the teacup, he sips the contents sip by sip, while enjoying such a wonderful flavor. Dropping the item back on the platter, the man notifies that he is done with the tea party. I want to look up and see the happy news that the person sitting across from me is done with her meal. Smiling, Altus, again trying to tease Lee somehow, talks about how she has a great appetite. Apparently, the cook will need to be given a special award for good effort today. The servants standing nearby freeze, staring off to the side in bewilderment. It seems strange to them that the man has now become so fit in just a few minutes, turning into an angel. A butler appears out of nowhere and stops later than His Majesty's chair and coughs. He doesn't want to disturb anyone, so he apologizes for the suddenness. However, the blonde man urgently needs to go to a meeting. Trying to chew the rest of her food, the girl immediately starts smiling. The anticipation of freedom is very sweet, for at last she will be left in complete peace, giving at least a little rest. Expressing his displeasure as well as surprise, the young man simply looks away, questioning himself. The strange thing was that the interlocutor's mood suddenly appeared good, and also her face became joyful. Rising from his seat, the man exhales as if realizing everything. It shouldn't be difficult to add up all the facts and draw your own conclusion. Smiling, Daeyeon in his head is already sobbing with joy. She hopes they never see each other again, thus making them happier. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Lee realizes this is bad. However, in her heart, she is already doing a victory dance. Now she would be free again and free to do whatever she wanted, or rather lay on the bed for hours on end. Sensing a strange reaction, Altius freezes, already near the door. It costs him nothing to just forget about the person in question, but that is definitely not to be done. Without turning around, the man calls out to Marie, who immediately freezes, squinting her eyes in surprise and trying to understand what they want to know from her. Introducing herself, the maiden bows her head in deference and asks what His Majesty needed. Fulfilling requests and orders always comes first. Turning toward the maid to better explain, the young man talks about Marie having full responsibility for the goddess. She should see to it that she lives a human life. This regime should continue until the emperor arrives at the palace again to control everything himself. Rounding her eyes, the girl wants to clarify something. She doesn't quite understand the instructions, but she wants to follow them to the best of her ability in order to avoid getting into a lot of trouble. Smiling slightly, the guy nods his head. He will finish with his work and then return back to the castle in order to rest and do the rest of his chores. Experiencing obvious disappointment, the lady frowns. I would like to know why the young man intends to come back here, and most likely soon, which is not good news. Virgo stands, trying not to destroy herself too much, but it doesn't come out well, while the maid falls to her knees, begging for the room to be cleaned. It seems as if an upper-class tornado has blown into Dayan's quiet life. The main castle is located in the heart of the capital. The white walls seem to be polished, thus showing a clear status. The estate screams that His Highness resides here. The emperor walks past the garden, pondering something, while the butler and guards walk behind him. The man asks if Michael intends to return to the other castle tomorrow, to which he receives an affirmative answer. Exhaling, the gray-haired servant apologizes for his inaccuracy. He wasn't implying anything, it's just that the guy was never interested in other possessions. Faltering, the blond man looked as if he was trying to find an excuse to jump off the subject, or at least try to make it so that he'd get off his back with questions. Realizing that the plan cannot be brought to reality, the prince agrees. He really never had any interest in anything of the sort, and was always concerned only with affairs of state. A major push for action happened a week ago. The servant who found Dinar alerted him to the fact that the lady was not eating anything and would not even leave the room, even for 10 minutes to take a walk. By asking if it is true, the man gets an affirmative answer. That's exactly what the maid who was next to the room daily said. There had to be some reason for this outburst, but there was none. It was clear from the first meeting that there was something wrong with the girl. She was acting strange and trying to appear strong, but in doing so she marked herself as a useless woman in this world. Exhaling quietly, the blond man orders that the lady be left alone. She can figure out her own mood or what she should do next, because she's not a little girl anymore. The goddess is completely useless to the empire. Even in the temple she probably won't be of any use, so there's no point in trying to send her there for work or anything. It's time for the lilacs to bloom. May came quite unnoticed, thus showing that it was already quite warm outside, and that was why the maiden was outside. Freezing, the man merely looks away, giving no particular indication that he has anything at all to look at other than such a beautiful picture. The goddess, eyes covered, sits near a tree, leaning her back on it to relax, thoughts hovering somewhere in the clouds, showing complete indifference. Still not daring to do anything, the blonde quietly exhales air. Muttering to himself how great it all is, he crumples in place. Resolving to at least do something, the guy steps across the soft grass toward Dayan's resting place, who doesn't react at all to the leather shoes. The eyes of a virgin are opened because of the attention drawn from the outside. She just sits on the grass like that, without any thought of not getting her clothes dirty. Trying not to spoil anything, the young man asks if the girl thinks she's too relaxed in this environment. It seems funny, but more of a strange thing to ask. Still doing everything silently, the beauty gently lifts a glance of dark eyes. It's like she's at the intersection of thoughts, trying to pick the right one and then say it. Patience is clearly not this man's best character trait, so Michael asks again if the interviewee has anything to say. He was tired of pulling out every word like a pincer. His eyes blink slowly while his face shows determination mixed with a slight indifference. She definitely has something to say. Trying not to sound overly rude, the lady declares that the blonde man is blocking her sunlight, thus ruining the whole idol that had taken shape. It turns out that all this girl wants to say to the emperor of a great country is that he's blocking her sunshine. It seems ridiculous to talk about it all like this. Stopping to lament the truth, the man smiles lightly. Joy and a certain chuckle takes hold of the king's emotions, thus adding a bit of charm. Hoping for nothing, Mikhail quietly asks if he can sit next to the beauty. Permission was unlikely to be granted, but he would very much like to do exactly what he was asking. Lilacs are blooming all around, while the couple just stares at each other in silence absent-mindedly, unable to take their eyes off each other. The man can't tell if he was looking at the flowers then, or at something more important to him. He was pulled out of his thoughts by a man's voice, which was probably the 100th time he had called out to His Majesty, who at the moment didn't care about the people around him. Smiling, and then turning toward the butler, the young man makes the point that there is nothing wrong here. He just glimpsed the flowers, which in the language means memories of youth. Lying on the bed, the girl looks at the ceiling as if she saw something extremely interesting, absolutely unrelated to her. Thoughts cannot gather in one pile, thus interfering greatly. Daeon has been actively doing nothing for a number of days now, yet still wants to do nothing badly. The strength had run out, thus pushing the urge to lie in bed again without getting out of there. Marie, who wouldn't want to fly out of the castle, appears as if out of nowhere. As she approaches the goddess's dwelling place, she calls her name and then braces her by her blanket. She should get up, but the lady only promises to do so in 10 minutes. The following words are like a bucket of ice water being tipped over a man. The maid announces that His Majesty has arrived and is now in the castle with them. Walking into the room, the emperor asks leave to get out of bed from the doorstep. The sun had long since risen, which meant it was time for her to get up and start living a normal life too. Feeling a kind of anger, the girl burrows even more into the sheet. She can't believe this nerdy young man has come again and is trying to get her to do obscure things. Smiling as if nothing is going on, the blonde asks how the lady is in the mood for the day. It's a sunny day, can't help but feel good, so the question makes sense. Quietly, in a monotone voice, the maiden says that she's just in a great mood. She keeps saying it with a face like she's been beaten up all night, so it's extremely hard to believe. Sighing, letting off vapors of anger, the girl asks, "Then why elaborate if it's already clear?" It seems that the emperor is clearly pouncing on an unnecessary conflict that may be about to happen. The prince, who had been giving too little time, suddenly decided to improve, and is now giving away an overabundance. Just the day before yesterday, sitting in the living room, he asks about the day's plans, to which he receives a sarcastic reply. The maiden planned to just breathe and not move, which clearly pissed off the blonde man, who only expresses his displeasure in his face. Yesterday, however, the man couldn't get off Daeun's back again. Spotting an acquaintance standing near a window, he approaches to find out what she's thinking, to which he gets another strange reply. She's always thinking about nothing, which means there's absolutely no point in asking such questions. The guy wants to scream at the hopelessness and disgusting nature of the girl. Today it all starts in the morning. Perhaps the best solution would be to just jump up and run away wherever the hell you are, but that's not a given. In her head, the heroine is begging to be left alone and ignored like she used to be. Blondie has very different feelings about everything that's going on. People aren't usually this stubborn, but this maiden is a completely different specimen who seems to defy all logic. The gaze is drawn to something next to the bed, eyes widening with anticipation, for the blonde didn't know there could be such a thing in this room. On the bedside table is a notebook in a plain dark brown cover. It's a drawing notebook that definitely should have had some notes in it. Deciding to ask a question that does not require an answer, the man asks if the girl can read their writing, to which he has answered with a simple no. Taking a seat next to the interlocutor, Mikhail still does not lag behind with his questions. He wonders if the lady wants to do foreign languages in the morning, to which he is again answered with a strange answer. In Altius, almost everyone can write and read. This is one of the most important things in this kingdom, so no one has a choice. As a consequence, one learns these things from childhood. Striking a noble pose, the guy asks what's stopping the beauty, and why she's so insecure about her powers or anything she could do. Puzzled, the brunette puts a hand to her chin. She still doesn't like the idea at all, even if she obviously has no choice about it. One only has to look at the emperor to see how interested he is in the case. He really wants to be listened to just once. Given some hope, the heroine immediately snaps it up. Still not getting out of bed, she gives out her answer, saying that she just doesn't feel like doing anything, especially not in the morning. Already visibly angry, the blonde exclaims that this is the first time he's ever seen such a lazy person in his life, to which he only gets a chuckle in response. The goddess had met a great many such individuals in her world. The maid, as well as His Highness, freeze, rounding their eyes as if they have heard the most bad and strange news of their entire lives. Running his fingers through his beautiful, smooth hair in despair, the young man only cries quietly. It seems that in the world of the lady in question, all people are the same untrained fools who are not interested in anything or anyone in life. Folding her arms across her chest, the brunette snorts as the guy is completely unaware of her past and how hard she worked before. It's too much to say that kind of thing about everyone. Turning around and heading towards the exit, while completely ignoring the maiden, the man orders that a teacher be called for her so that she can study in the mornings. The butler immediately bows his head, showing just how loyal he is, so he promises that he will fulfill everything. It remains clear that no one is considering Daejeon's opinion at all. Another brilliant thought creeps into his head, while the young man thinks of other things. It would be a good idea to exercise in the morning, since the beauty doesn't move at all. She also doesn't know how to wield a weapon at all. For him, as the best person in terms of dealing with swords and the rest of his accessories, this is definitely unacceptable. Lighting up with a smile and hoping for a positive answer, the blonde asks if his girlfriend would like to work out together, since he's never had a partner in his life before. Michael, still on his wavelength, continues to ask for it, for he will be able to train Lee well. The knight standing behind can't string two words together, and their faces express unasked questions. It was strange that the man decided to suggest such a thing, since everyone said that he liked to be alone and not to be distracted by anyone while practicing. The reason is unclear, but the goddess asks what time they can start. The words that were given as an answer hit like a bolt of lightning, making me shrink back from crying. Training takes place daily at 5 in the morning with a 1-hour duration. Trying to cushion the fall, the brunette asks if they'll be at 5 in the evening, to which the guy chuckles, because everything will take place at 5 in the morning. A line like that sounds more like some kind of evil joke. Trying to find out exactly what the maiden meant, the blonde asks about training and time. This reaction seems to have been caused by both influencing factors. As if reading her mind, the brunette asks about both options. She thinks it all sounds too weird to be real. Still smiling, trying not to show it, the emperor apologizes but still insists on his own, because everything said is not a joke that can be simply cancelled. The future schedule for the day is rolling around in my head, which doesn't look all that happy. First we'll be training, then studying, but to all this you will have to get up almost every day at 5 in the morning, thus spoiling yourself a regimen. Such pastime options are more like a slow death to an unprepared body, so the lady refuses again. Certainly not in this life she'll be plowing again, just as she won't in the next. A sad face mixed with slight anger shows just how disappointed Michael is with this behavior. You could think of anything, but definitely not this, because the word give up was not in the guy's vocabulary. The conversation was over, but things started to pick up more and more interestingly the next day. There is a knock on the room, thus trying to wake the occupant. Marie, who was already nearby, unlocks and then lets the man inside. It costs him nothing to begin his actions, but with a moment he stands beside the bed, scrutinizing the blanket the maiden is under. Moving even closer, the emperor feels a slight shiver. He counts to 3, but if the lady still doesn't wake up and get up, the man will give her a whipping. No sounds can be heard from under the blanket, because obviously Daejeon isn't too eager to talk about anything, thus showing her ignoring it. Blondie is starting to get bored with this scenario. If he doesn't come to wake up his girlfriend, she doesn't even think about getting up because in fact she absolutely doesn't care about her life or her health. The brunette finally gets up and sits on the bed, rubbing her eyes. There would definitely be something wrong with her body if she continued to lie in bed and sleep all day without any movement. Moving even closer to the girl, the blonde asks if she really enjoys living with this routine and not helping herself in any way, but only ruining her body. Raising his hand, he points to the curtains, which he clearly doesn't like, as looking at them you can see a slight anger in his eyes. Because of them, not a single ray of light penetrates into the room, thus leaving the room without any proper illumination. Turning to his interlocutor again, Mikhail asks if she even distinguishes between laziness now or night, because with such a dense fabric, it is definitely not clear. Perhaps that's why the friend sleeps 24 hours a day, because she just doesn't realize when it's night and when it's day, thus ruining everything for herself. It is better to keep silent, otherwise the situation will worsen and the man will start talking even more nonsense than before. Sadly looking away, the maiden tries to focus her thoughts on something else, lest she snap and start getting involved in another altercation out of choice. Not wanting to say anything more, the emperor turns around and walks away. Now Dayun is obliged to get up and go for breakfast, and since the weather is just fine outside, she will have breakfast outside, and she has no choice. Standing up and heading for the exit, the brunette mumbles something inaudible, clearly in protest of everything. The blonde hums, for the girl has no idea how difficult it is to deal with her temper. The door swings open again, thus distracting the emperor from his thoughts that are flying in from all sides. His Majesty must pay attention to the cushion of stuff. That's where the packaged letter lies, so the blonde asks the old man to tell him what the urgent message is that can't wait more than 1 hour. Opening the letter and unfolding the sheet, the man's gaze immediately darkens. He's being written to again by these holier-than-thou people who insist on meeting the goddess. The saints insist on a meeting to make sure the girl is treated properly and cared for exactly as Lee herself demands. As usual, there's all sorts of strife going on in the Temple of Gurnia, involving Daeon. It had already been over 4 months since the goddess had been sent to the palace. The elder standing on the throne bows his head, expressing concern. It's important for him to know exactly how the emperor treats a woman. The conditions have to be right. We need to find out what happened to the goddess and if she's safe, with no downsides to mess things up. Smiling a smile that seems out of place, the pastor asks the young man across the street what he knows about the palace and what goes on outside its walls. Bending down and on his knees, the young boy promises that he will fulfill everything to the best of his ability. He shouldn't make any false promises, but he is, somehow, confident in himself and his abilities. There is a huge garden near the castle, in which all the flowers and trees have already begun to bloom and turn green. A huge fountain right in the middle gives refreshment, and also the red tapestries accentuate the whole beauty. There are many plates spread out on the table with different dishes for every taste and color. Water and beverage glasses are placed directly to the right hand for the convenience of diners. At the table there is only the emperor and the goddess herself, who is carefully looking at everything on the table, trying not to show that she is interested. Coughing into his fist to get some attention, the blonde man strikes up a conversation about something he's only recently learned. Someone from the temple will be coming to meet her in the next few days. Already putting the spoon in her mouth, the girl freezes, showing her surprise with widened eyes. She finds it odd that she's being remembered somewhere so important. Slowly lowering her fork back onto her plate, the pretty girl still listening to the words. She doesn't know what to expect from the monks, so she intends to put guards on Daeon for her own safety. It all seems kind of fake because the girl has no value. She's completely useless, and no one could possibly need to meet her, assuming he's sane, of course. Freezing and then slowly boiling over with anger, the blonde man just ready to scream. This lady pisses him off, and she's getting better and better at it every time. Exhaling air to temper his fervor, the man reminds the goddess that she is the only treasure that has descended into the empire in the last 32 years, thus stunning everyone around him. It was after Lee's arrival that the temple saw an increase in the number of members who seemed to have more faith in the powers that be, and began to donate more to improve conditions. For the monks and the temple, which was slowly falling into disrepair, the brunette is like a goose laying golden eggs. They don't care, but now they have more money for their needs. Thinking about it, the girl recalls the moment when she first arrived in the kingdom. She really did have everyone looking at her with strange eyes as she entered the palace. It would be much worse if Daeon had the power to heal, since that's what the prophecy said. She would be unstoppable and everyone around her would go crazy. The prediction said she would have the powers of a saint. If this had been even a shred of truth, the man would have been the first to run to give his money to the temple. But it turned out to be a lie. There was no hope for anything. At the very beginning of the journey, the brunette had been begged and forced to try and heal the flowers or do some other miracle for almost 24 hours, thus making her feel even more useless. In any case, it could be forgotten about. The predictions have not come true, and all they have in the castle is a useless lady who fell on their heads like an apple from a lonely apple tree. Bringing the conversation to a close, The man talks about taking the girl to his house, despite political pressure to provide everything she needed and to follow up on her possible strength. Silenced, the blonde doesn't dare move from his seat. Green eyes stare off into the distance and then change direction, switching to the woman she's talking to. Staring back, but at the same time trying to avoid such intense scrutiny, the girl can't understand why she needed to hear all this interesting story. The brunette certainly doesn't feel like she deserves such words to herself, so you can forget about it. Such favor could not follow even after 100 years of living in this palace. Still continuously looking into the eyes of the beauty, Michael asks her not to leave. Such a request sounds too personal, but perhaps it is a personal request in this vein. Finally interrupting the silence after the last line, he repeats his words again, asking that they not leave. And even if the holier-than-thou men are going to talk about a lot of things, the ladies should not join them. A memory comes to mind that describes the situation just right. Growing up, my mom taught that a girl should never go near an adult who treats the girl to cookies. Without saying anything else, the emperor looks at the pensive expression on the young maiden who is interested in something with a smile on his face. From the next day, they will learn fencing together. This will obviously help pump your muscles, as well as allow you to defend yourself if necessary. Expressing her displeasure, the brunette asks about the topic they were talking about before, but the man interrupts her. Virgo clearly doesn't care what they talk about. The important thing is to just not study in the morning. Hard work will help you change all your habits and finally come around to feeling better about yourself in general, and then socially, after the need to leave the palace arises. Dayon, only worth a try, and then she would see the better side, helping herself to change her mind. You can't give up the chance for a normal life? Smiling again, for the 100th time that day, the prince waits for a positive answer. He tried to wrap things up so that the upcoming lessons wouldn't seem like anything too burdensome to the odd lady. The servants, all this time standing behind the couple who had interrupted their breakfast, freeze, expressing their disgust. They'd like to know it's happening now, but it's not that bad. It was at this pace that the king's project to revitalize Li began. She spent her time making the most of it, trying to ignore the other people who were clearly uncomfortable with this treatment while the training began to pay off. In the room, sitting on a chair across the room, a man introduces himself, saying that he is simply Theora. The blonde man is clearly unwilling to tell all the information about himself, trying to be secretive. Crouching down, as if afraid of doing something wrong, the brunette nods. He looks kind, but as life shows, you shouldn't always trust the cover, because everyone is so kind when you first meet him. Daring to ask a single question, the maiden asks if Theora is a priest, to which she receives a negative. The man is only an apprentice for now, one of them. The next line is given much more easily. The brunette wants to ask why the guy wanted to meet her, thus trying to get to the castle for information. A nervous smile gives away the office. According to him, it is obvious because everyone around is concerned about the health and well-being of the saint, which is a sheer lie adorned with incomprehensible tinsel. They just want to figure out how and where the personage will be used, so, breaking down into a scream, she accuses the priest. She's not some revelation, and she's definitely not the person they want in the castle. Shutting up for just a few seconds, pausing to let the lady calm down, the blonde asks what kind of person she is then if she thinks she's not so special. Clutching the hem of her dress with her hands, the girl, losing confidence, simply reminds herself that she has no options. The skills everyone had hoped for were not given, and she came from another world that is not Hergonia. With another sigh, she only says that she is unable to do anything about it. The lady doesn't have to explain herself at all, because it's not her fault that people confuse her with someone else she isn't even. The words make the young man shrink back and remain silent for the rest of the conversation. That the maiden was found in the divine forest is pure coincidence, for in the end she never wished to be there. Interrupting a bitter tirade, the guy disagrees. The interlocutor need not be told that this is a mistake, for she would not have been sent from Hergonia to this world for nothing. It was all planned and intended. Hoping for awareness, the man goes on to say that there is a reason for everything. Even in the heroine's appearance, there has to be some purpose here, which means she can't be saying these things about herself. Looking into the eyes of the interlocutor, there you can see only determination and confidence in his words. The strange thing is, the fact that he's too sure of what he's saying and doesn't even question it. A virgin can have no purpose in this life, and unfortunately, this is a well-known fact. You don't have to look through this girl's soul to understand what's going on with her. Changing the subject so as not to embarrass the lady further, the apprentice asks how her ladyship is doing at the castle. All conditions must be perfect for someone like this goddess. Her cheeks turn red, letting her know that the brunette is embarrassed. All this time she's just been resting and lying around, doing nothing, and she can't say exactly that now, lest she embarrass herself. Wondering what kind of story to tell, a brilliant thought occurs to Daejeon. She quietly talks about how she is going to learn fencing and will be starting classes very soon. She's also going to learn the alphabet and more, which brings joy to the face of the young man who doesn't know that the king is making him do all this. The apprentice asks who will teach writing to the goddess herself. Realizing how pathetic she is, the girl still keeps trying to break the comedy as hard as she can. No one has decided who exactly will be the teacher yet, so it's an open question. I want to cry at everything that's going on or cower in a corner. If a lady isn't forced or told to do something, she won't even consider making any developmental attempts. Perhaps that is why all the people around treat the lady so unhelpfully, thus ruining all relations with her. But that doesn't matter at all now. A man offers to be a writing teacher. The girl stares at the monk with huge eyes and freezes, trying to figure out if she's just hearing things. Such kindness seems like a great start, however. No one knows how it will end. Smiling, the young man mentions the fact that even in the temple, he was the very person who taught the kids. Everyone has reviewed it extremely well, so you don't have to worry about it. The results promise to be in your face in the first week. Without saying a word, the girl seemed to digest all the information she had received. She should think twice about what she will need to do before giving her answer. As luck would have it, the image of Michael pops up in my mind, asking that the lady not leave him. He warned what the consequences might be and told the whole story in color so he could be believed. Blondin says not to get close to anyone from the temple, but when you think about it that way, it's unlikely if the heroine continues to be so useless, she stays to live in the castle on full provision. This proposal doesn't seem like the worst option, and it improves the situation. So, stammering a little, the girl promises she'll think about it. As if glowing with joy, the man opposite agrees, for it will only be a pleasure for him to try the goddess's training. If the answer is no, it's clear, but much worse. Rising from his seat, the young man bows as if he wants to say something goodbye. However, he doesn't immediately succeed, as he tries to vaporize as quickly as possible. Turning around, the monk slows his step and all haste is gone, while he slowly follows the corridor, heading for the sunshine exit to head to the temple. Stopping just outside the very door leading to the street, the man seems to be thinking about something. There are too many thoughts in my head after meeting such a beautiful lady. Clasping his hands close together, the boy exhales quietly, happy with what just happened. It is not noticeable from the outside, however, it was crucial for him to get this meeting. Looking up at the sky, the young man's face was filled with bliss as he was finally able to meet Miss Daejeon, who had entered this world like something unearthly and beautiful. In the main palace, there is, as usual, the turmoil inherent in estates. Even though it's only morning, the maids are already cleaning up, and the butler is scurrying after the king with the necessary papers. Walking into the office, the blonde sits down in a chair and then asks about the last meeting. It turns out that the priest will now be training Miss Lee, thus getting even closer. Angry at himself and everyone around him, the man falls silent. This apprentice is clearly a rogue if he doesn't give up after a few warnings, which may not end well in the end. Immediately, no more than a minute, Michael gets up from the table, putting aside all his business. Turning to the butler standing next to him, he talks about heading to the palace to see Daejeon to find out the details. It's definitely not going to work that way, because it's definitely not going to be the way Theora wants it to be. His brethren have breed too many dishonest people who want to make everyone around them worse, but that's definitely not going to happen. There is complete silence in Mistress's room, as usual, which is broken by Marie, who, approaching the bed, asks if the goddess is still asleep. This is clearly an unanswerable question because of the planting. She had to get out of bed in order to get dressed and prepared to go out into the main hall for another unscheduled meeting with the prince, who had only recently arrived. Sensing someone else's presence, the blonde turns toward the entrance, flapping his eyes in surprise and pleased that the brunette has arrived after all and not stayed in her bed. Moving closer to the chair, the girl asks what the big deal is, to which she gets an answer about the priest. The man had visited the girl quite recently, and so the emperor had come to see how it had gone. Taking a seat in the chair across from the guy, the heroine lowers her gaze somewhere to the floor, saying that nothing special ever happened, even though she expected it to. Realizing that words wouldn't come out that easily, the guy asks again about something so not special. They talked for a good half hour. Deciding to finally give up, the goddess recalls the conversation and talks about how he introduced himself as Theora and said he was still a priest for now, not a real commissioner. The blonde eagerly asks to continue saying everything that has happened, while the butler leans in a bit, for he is familiar with the name. It's strange that there's such an intimidating atmosphere around the prince because of this meeting that happened and went wrong. There were also questions about the brunette's life in the castle. To such a question, the lady replied by saying that she was going to learn fencing very soon, for she had promised to do so and more long ago. Freezing and trying to find the right words, the man doesn't understand what's going on, because such answers seem completely different from what the goddess would have said just a few days ago. Covering his mouth with his hand, the man tries to restrain his impulses, to which he evokes a strange emotion on the face of his interlocutor, who is simply trying to retell the conversation. Without interrupting her words, the guy asks to continue, so the maiden mentions the alphabet. This is one of the most important parts, as well as a letter that one would ideally want to learn. No longer holding back, Michael begins to cough lightly, putting out his other hand as if in defense and showing that he cares about what he's being told. The butler, who had been silent all this time, gently leans over and congratulates His Majesty while he tries to hide the victorious smile that is bursting out. Not realizing what this strange reaction is, the girl coughs into her hand, trying to get attention so she won't be interrupted again, thus killing the whole mood. Next, the monk suggested something else, but this line is somehow the hardest to give, even though it shouldn't be the way it's going now in the warped scenario. Looking at the lady with a warm gaze, the emperor can't be pleased. She just recently said she didn't want to do anything, and now it's the opposite. Such beautiful changes make me happier than a birthday. Finally formulating the words that kept not wanting to come out of her mouth, the lady talks about Tara offering himself for the role. Such news helped all the happiness fly away at the same moment. Insidiousness is not a good trait, however. It is definitely a good one at some points. Saint clearly overdid it this time, because they all like to meddle where they shouldn't and always get into bad situations. They know all too well from experience, for each has had to go through all the stages of anger that is placed on them from their emperor. Exhaling air and tuning into the wave of finally ending things, the blonde thinks about making an example of him. We'll have to get rid of Michael, except for one person. All holy men will be barred from entering their castles or estates, lest they have time to be brainwashed by the fact that the maiden is obliged to go with them. The man didn't seem to be angry at all. Such joy couldn't help but bring a smile, as everything went much better than originally expected, despite all the problems. In deciding to take this step and ask a question, the lady again clarifies if she is allowed to ask a lot of non-essential questions just because she just wants to. Folding her hands into a lock and then making puppy dog-like eyes, the girl asks if Theora can tutor her in her spare time for full development like everyone wanted. The servants, who were still as silent as ever, stiffened with shock, while quiet sighs of indignation came from one side as one. The emperor looks at his interlocutor in silence. He has nothing to say at this point, even though he really wants to do something, but can't quite do it. Turning her gaze away, the brunette hums to herself. That response seems like a killer, so there are no guarantees now. Perhaps they just shouldn't have asked, but refused the offer right away. Laughing a not-so-kind laugh, showing his obvious mockery, the blonde man is not going to put up with such requests, or worse, some apprentice in his castle. Already hoping for a favorable outcome, the girl moves forward to hear the cherished yes, but light chuckles are still the only answer. A man who had been behaving relatively normally only a short time ago was now laughing as if he were having a seizure that could not be stopped by any means. Even Dayon, who wasn't used to the new world yet, understood everything. She turns away, realizing what a mistake she made without even thinking of the consequences. That's the kind of consequences that come from spoiling the emperor's mood out of the blue. A wave of laughter is heard throughout the castle as well as the courtyard, further confirming that this is what happens when you spoil Michael's mood. Evening sleep is always the most important, but reading before it seems even more appealing. Marie now understood what it meant to enroll for 10 years in a couple of seconds. She sighs, feeling sorry for the girl who is peacefully reading in bed. Mistress is still unclear as to why Altius acted this way. It is strange that His Majesty so dislikes the idea of a priest teaching her to write that he is willing to scream that it is a bad idea. Freezing, Marie slowly turns toward the bed. From the look in her eyes, it seems like the stupidest thing in the entire world has just been said. Bowing her head as if trying to evade the details, the servant girl says that the Emperor and the servants have an extremely bad relationship, so they are enemies. The goddess herself wouldn't like having people in her house that she disliked. Sighing, the girl realizes there's some truth to it. Bad relationships are always connected, and so it won't work this time, as we'll have to listen to the blonde guy. The girl realized from the start that the man would not like the idea. She kind of knew she would, and that he would refuse without even listening to the end. It was an obvious thing, however, the brunette never knew the guy would react so badly. It seemed like a lot of people had to retreat or calm the young man down. Now, everything that had happened seemed more than unrealistic, given all the details that had emerged as if from the ground. After the heroine already thought that everything was over, the Emperor threw up a new interesting thing, which shocked because she calmed down, and then just agreed to the proposal. The knights on guard, who were already hoping only that the man wouldn't kill everyone around him, were almost at a loss for words. No one expected such a dramatic turn of events. Everything seemed quite normal, and perhaps he had simply agreed out of politeness, but further conditions followed. He has only one version of events in which Theora becomes a writing teacher. Leaning a little closer, not trying to push, the blonde man speaks his mind. The girl must study hard so that the Emperor will not regret agreeing to such an adventure. Getting up from his seat, the man slowly makes his way towards his interlocutor and gently takes her hand, trying not to startle her with his outbursts. Belle freezes, trying to figure out what the whole point of this adventure is. The first shock was consent, and the second was further behavior that continues even now. Leaning in slightly, the guy smiles, trying to reassure the heroine. It's okay if the learning process is slow, just as it's okay if the results don't show up right away. Trying to be as gentle as possible, Altius simply asks for the maiden to promise him that she will try her best, and then everything will be just fine. Without letting go of her hand, the young man asks that the girl never give up. You can't leave things unfinished when you realize you can do your best. Mikhail sits in his office in the castle. There are no people present due to the fact that it is deep night, and everyone has long since gone elsewhere to get some sleep. The paper has been scribbled out for a while now, and this isn't even the first piece of paper that's been used. The hand with the pen glides quickly and clearly, trying to bring out neat letters. The eye is drawn to something on the side. This is not a good time to be distracted by all sorts of things that don't need much attention, but there is no choice to do so. There's nothing lying on the side, but the image of Li Daiyan, who was staring pleadingly with big dark eyes, trying to force a decision, pops into my mind. Startled, the blonde tries to banish the unnecessary visions and just dive back into his work. Closing his eyes, he tries to forget himself. A cup of coffee is lowered onto the table. The butler did as he was asked, as he was the only person who had not yet gone to bed. Taking the drink, the man gives thanks. Pouring water to make the coffee hotter, the guy is thinking about something, but he is interrupted by a voice asking him to say something, which is answered with a nod. It's about a morning conversation with Li that everyone attended. The Emperor allowed the priest to enter the palace, but he had previously said that all servants should be on guard with them. Bringing the cup closer, the blonde considers the glare on the dark reflection while thinking about something. He should choose the right words to inspire confidence. He's sure the saints themselves don't want to come to the estate. Sitting down on the bed and wrapping her arms around her knees, the brunette looks around helplessly. She doesn't understand what happened and has no way to explain the Emperor's impulse. If it's that bad, then I'd like to know why His Majesty allowed it to be done the way the goddess wanted it done, even if she had to beg for it. Setting the mug on the table, the man hums. He was reluctant to finish his drink, for there were things far more important to him right now. It's worth finishing the conversation we started. Looking away, the boy remembers Dayon again. He didn't have a particularly strong argument as to why he allowed the visitation and training, but the maiden wanted it very badly, so that was good enough for him. Early mornings don't start with a morning nap, but then light tea and some other morning routine. The girl is all exhausted standing in her fencing uniform, trying to catch her breath because it's getting incredibly difficult to breathe. Trying to fight back and repeat all the moves ideally given her terrible physicality, the brunette falls to her knees, holding her weight with her hands. She feels like she's about to vomit or throw up a breakfast that wasn't there. It's only the second day of training with His Highness. The blonde bends over to see what's wrong. The heroine only ran 10 small circles, but it looks like it proved to be an impossible task. Resenting everything, Michael asks how the girl even lived to her years with such a weak body. Maybe she has a mountain of luck, or maybe it's something else. It seems that such frail hands wouldn't be able to hold the sword at all, hence interrupting the training. Trying not to cry or let out her anger, the girl clenches her fists quietly. The last time she ran such volumes was only in high school, so now she feels like she's just going to flat out die. Replays that remain unspoken do not impress the blonde in any way, who expects any action or effort on the part of the student. Moving forward, he sits down on his knees to be level with his charge, who seems completely unlikely to get up. Extending his hand in a sign of reconciliation, the man assures her that soon the girl will start doing a little better, and then she might even be able to become a master. The horror on his face cannot be replaced by anything. I want to run away, but I don't have any strength left. The word soon is scary, because it means they'll keep doing things like this. Trying to crawl away, the brunette just begs for her to give up, and then it will all be over, but they only sneer at her. The blonde asks if she really thought he would just let her do it after all the promises. No longer having the energy to argue, Dion picks up his feet and leans back on the grass, which takes in his embrace like his own blood, letting him rest a bit. At this rate, the beauty will soon have no energy left to do anything at all, and then she will simply never go anywhere else. The mood has noticeably worsened, and it's unsettling. No longer intending to be patient, the guy asks with a slight smile to get up off the ground, because they still have a lot to learn, and a lot to learn to get at least one step closer to their dreams. A sword-like stick appears in her hands, which was simulated specifically for hands as weak as the brunette's. The posture is correct, so you can start trying to grab it. First up will be the basics that almost everyone knows, so they're worth memorizing. The Emperor asks for 5 strokes in which you must put all your strength. Swinging the stick, the maiden tries to swing it as hard as possible, so that everyone realizes that she is capable of at least something in this life. The sword is raised above her head, while making it clear that nothing in this life is definitely not given to the beauty. Things are much more complicated in this world. Abruptly lowering the thing, it's as if the brunette is trying to continue the loop, completing all 5 delivered punches that were expected of her. After such tricks, the prince freezes as if halted, trying to hold back a burst of horror or laughter. This is something he's never seen before in his life, which makes what's going on that much more interesting. The girl lowers her makeshift saber and looks guiltily at the standing people. She'd like to apologize, but it wouldn't change anything since there was nothing she could do about it. Turning to Byrne, Michael asks how he's even training her if she couldn't do basic exercises now, to which he gets a response. Shrugging his shoulders, the knight simply talks about how weak the goddess's body is. Her cheeks are covered in a blush that betrays shame, and tears are frozen in her eyes. The heroine considers herself a disgrace, for she didn't expect to be so bad even at this. Lowering her head ever lower, the girl realizes that she shouldn't have agreed to anything. It never works out for her anyway, so why would she suddenly think this time would be different? Turning to his apprentice, the Emperor sees only a crying tomato who is clearly embarrassed. This picture is a little hilarious, but more to make you feel guilty or some other weird feeling. Deciding on an important step, a man calls a knight and asks him to hand him a real sword, which is his favorite. He himself can show by example, but the main thing is that the maiden should be attentive. Taking the weapon in hand, the Emperor gets into the proper stance, expressing nothing but a calm yet eerie focus that is lacking in many. Raising his sword into the air, the young man swings it, performing beautiful tricks through the air. Even though Dayon doesn't do fencing, but his skill was impossible to miss from the first seconds. Marie's words from the bathroom come to mind. The man used to be bad at swordsmanship, so he decided to practice daily until he was perfect. People who achieve this kind of result through hard work are truly amazing. It is now impossible to imagine that the prince was ever unable to pull off tricks so skillfully. Turning to his companion, thus breaking her from her thoughts, the guy holds out the thing, saying that it was her turn now, which meant she couldn't escape, even if she was unlikely to succeed. Still remaining friendly, Altius points out that there are no people who get it right the first time. If everyone was doing well, there would be no point in practicing hard for results. Staring at his friend, Daeon tries not to hug him or do something else stupid. It's worth admitting that he's not that bad, as he's always confident and insistent. It wasn't even conceivable that he could give in to someone's weaknesses, yet he did.